My wife and I are recovering at home now after our ordeal. What happened to us will stay with us forever. My name is Mitch, and my wife's name is Ruby. Let me tell you what happened to us. We live in southern Utah, where the weather is usually dry and life is uneventful. We live in a cookie-cutter subdivision, and I have a 9-to-5 at-home job, and my wife works weekends at a local grocery store. Needless to say, we lack adventure. We were not quite expecting, though, what we discovered. Anyway, one day about a year ago, we decided that for our 10-year anniversary, we would explore mountains. We didn't want to explore what was here, and we couldn't afford an exotic vacation, so we decided to go to mountains as far as we could get. That was the Appalachian Mountains. We started doing some research and started saving for our adventure of a lifetime. As the date approached, we settled on a gorgeous area that's located in Tennessee, just before crossing the North Carolina line, called the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Now, neither of us have ever seen more than 2 trees put together, both of us having been born and raised in the far southern Utah. So we watched some YouTube videos and read some blogs to prepare ourselves, and we bought gear that we would need. We booked a remote cabin for 6 nights that would have no cell signal, no internet, and only solar power and well water. We were going all out on this mountain experience. We were so excited to actually do something. We landed in Nashville, Tennessee around 6 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. We finally got through the whole baggage claim and never-ending wait and was able to get our small SUV we rented for the week. It was dusk already, but we were excited to start our vacation, so we drove straight there. We used the vehicle's GPS to get us to the general location, but the GPS lost signal a couple times, and my wife had to pull out a paper map. You know, one of those ancient artifacts our grandparents used to navigate back in the old times. Anyway, it was pitch black out in the forested mountains, and we could only see what the headlights let us see. We thought we made a wrong turn when the road ended in a creek, but it wasn't. We had to cross the creek and continue on what looked like a smoothed-over mudslick going straight up a mountainside. Unfortunately, I didn't order the all-wheel drive version of the SUV, and we got stuck about 50 feet up. So the first night of our vacation was spent inside the vehicle on a cold, creepy, muddy trail. The next morning, I woke up early around 5:30 a.m. It was real foggy, as one might expect in the area we were in. I got out to relieve myself and inspect what could be done to get us unstuck and back on the trail to the cabin. After I finished relieving myself, I bent down at the front of the SUV and discovered that we weren't stuck in mud. We were stuck against a huge edge of a rock protruding up from the dirt. So I jumped in and backed down a few feet and managed to get around it and finish going up this pathway. It was another 20 minutes or so of driving through the dense forest and rocky, muddy terrain, and then we reached our remote cabin. So we were truly alone and on our own. We got the vehicle unloaded and we unpacked and took a nap. We were wore out. My wife woke up around noon, prepared us some lunch so that we could do a little exploring around the property. We had to bring all the food we needed for the week with us, and we brought some games and a few books for each of us to read. Since the wood-burning stove was the cabin's source of heat, we also bought a bunch of firewood bundles to use with a little firewood that was already there. We were having a blast being out away from civilization and our boring lives. After lunch, we strapped on our new hiking boots and set off to break them in a little. We walked about 10 minutes away from the cabin to get a view that was advertised, and boy was it a view. We could see for miles. The leaves were just starting to turn beautiful colors on a few trees speckled here and there, so it really added to the scene. After gazing out for about a minute, we could hear some howling and some cat-like growls in the distance. It was a little unnerving, to be honest, but we were in the woods. I had bought an off-brand Bowie knife from a well-known bargain website, so I carried it on my waist, and we both had some bear spray. We decided to head back inside and unwind and get a good night's rest, and do some hiking and some games and relax in the rocking chairs tomorrow. So we did. Day 2 and 3 were wonderful. The third night we were there, though, I was awakened by the sounds of leaves crunching and sticks breaking. I was terrified because the sounds I'm used to are city life sounds. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and go up to the window and shine it around to see nothing. Nothing but darkness, the outlines of large trees and shrubs, and a big dark misshapen tree stump. I closed the curtains and got back into bed and went to sleep. The next morning, I got up a little early and looked out the window again, and all I could see was bushes, tall grass, large trees, and shrubbery. Exactly what I saw the last couple of days. But something did strike me as odd. I didn't see any stump like I saw last night. I assumed it was the moon's light playing tricks on me, and the poor quality of the flashlight the owners put in the nightstand. I didn't tell my wife because she's easily frightened. So I went into the kitchen area and made some coffee, and I surprised my wife with some breakfast in bed. She loved it. After breakfast, we decided that we wanted a real adventure, and we were going to hike as far as we could and explore as much of this majestic forest as possible. So we got our backpacks stocked up and set out at about 10 a.m. We went down the slope to the rear of the cabin and went for at least 2 miles through the forested mountainside. There were no trails, just gorgeous, untouched, rugged landscapes. We get to a good-sized creek and decide to cross it. Now, it wasn't very deep, only seemed about 2 feet in the middle for just a very short stretch. The current was surprisingly strong, though, for being only 2 feet deep. So we go across it. My wife slipped on a rock under the surface and fell right into the water in the middle of the creek. She fell backward and her whole backpack went under the water with her. As she struggled to get up, the bottom of the arm strap broke on the backpack, but I didn't know it when I went to take it off of her. As I was getting it off her, it slipped right out of my hand because it was now waterlogged and heavy. It immediately started floating very quickly down the creek, and I couldn't catch it before it was too far away. Between getting my wife back on her feet and trying not to slip myself, it was hopeless. Her backpack had the map and a compass in it, as well as her food and blanket and other odd-end things. We got to the other side of the creek, and she took off her soaked shirt and put on the one of mine. Thankfully, her jacket and pants were both waterproof. We decided to get off the bank and go up a little ways to a flat spot on top of a bluff that we could see. I was going to try my hand at a fire to get our boots dried out and our socks. Unfortunately, the bluff provided no view to see where we were to get any sort of bearings. Everything just looked the same. So I got out my ferro rod and found some sticks and made my first fire. I was feeling very accomplished, and my wife was quite happy. We had several snacks still in my backpack, and I brought a book. So we sat by the fire, ate a snack, and I read to her while we warmed our feet and our socks and shoes dried out. We had to stay there several hours for them to dry off. It was getting later in the day, and we knew we needed to get back. Now, to be clear, I have never been in these woods, and I am not an outdoorsy kind of guy typically. Every tree looked the same to me. I had no idea where we were, and I needed to not panic my wife because I felt lost. So we went back down and crossed the creek again. This time, we took off our shoes and socks to cross back over. After we crossed, I tried leading us back the way I remembered, but nothing looked familiar. I just hadn't paid enough attention to where we were going. I was having a very hard time even finding our tracks, because it all looked the same to me. We ended up going in a circle, somehow ending back up at the same creek. My wife asked me if we were lost, and I had to admit that I had no idea where we were. She freaked out some. and we both decided to keep going back away from the creek, and surely we would run into another cabin or a road or something. Well, we ended up hiking for a couple hours, but found nothing. It was starting to get dark, and I had a nauseating feeling we were going to have to sleep out in the forest. We found a flat area between several big trees that we decided to make our home for the night. I got a small fire going, and the only thing we had was one snack bar that we split, and the clothes on our back to sleep. I didn't have a blanket in my backpack, as the only blanket was in hers. As it got dark, the forest got creepy. We could hear some animal noises and random brush crackling noises. It was quite scary. The only thing I had was my Bowie knife and my bear spray. I gave her the bear spray to hold on, and I held my knife. About 2 hours after dark, we hear some growling coming from a distance to our right. I held the knife out of fear and adrenaline ready for action, and my wife pulled the safety off the bear spray. To our horror, we could see a pair of eyes glowing from the firelight in the tree just above us to the right. It made a cat-like growl and a hiss noise. It jumped right down out of the tree and landed about 15 feet away. It was a full-grown cougar. My wife let off the bear spray, and as soon as she did, it let out a scream and ran back, and turned and climbed into the tree it came out of, and jumped off to the next trees. We were beside ourselves in fear. We didn't know how much bear spray there was left, or if that big cat would come back. Well, we found out about 30 minutes later when I heard leaves rustling behind us. I swung my head around, and as I did, that cougar was circling us from behind. My wife let off the remainder of the bear spray, and this time it stealthily jumped out of its path. I had the knife drawn out in my hand, and I picked up a stick that was on fire and held it in my hands. My wife closely tucked herself behind me and started crying. My heart sank when I heard her mumble that she didn't want to die on our anniversary. I have never felt more helpless in all my life. The cougar charged at me, and I managed to swing the fire stick at it and hit its paw. It retreated back several feet, but burning its paw put the fire out on the stick. I threw the stick down. As soon as I did that, it charged and swiped at me again. I swung my Bowie knife and got it on the arm, but did little damage to it. It ripped the arm off my jacket, but thankfully didn't tear any flesh yet. My wife started screaming so loud and fell backwards trying to back away. To my horror, the cougar now fixed its eyes on her and started circling around to get to her. At this point, my emotions were in overdrive and my adrenaline was exploding. I started shaking and screamed at it to stay away from my wife. Like it really cared if we lived or died. We were its next meal as far as I was concerned. I stepped over in front of my wife again to block her from the cougar. The cougar let off another high-pitched loud scream as it looked over to its right, which is our left. I froze when I saw what happened next. My wife grabbed my leg and screamed. There, about 100 feet out, was a huge, hairy-looking beast howling and growling, running right toward us. I had no idea what to think. I was frozen in fear and fatigue. That massive creature came right into the light of the fire, and I could see exactly what it was. It was a Bigfoot, and it dove right at the cougar. This Bigfoot was at least 7 feet tall, and it had to have outweighed this cougar 2-to-1. The cougar lunged at him, and that Bigfoot threw punches and rolled that cougar around. The cougar was matching it with bites and scratches. The cougar had some bravery to take a fight on with the king of the forest himself. He managed to toss it off like you would toss a piece of clothing, and he stood up. The cougar gained its footing again and lunged back at Bigfoot. at which point he caught it in the air by the neck and slung it with full force into a tree. Judging by the cracking sounds and force of the hit, that cougar died almost instantly. He dropped it to the ground and stood there with his back toward us. I was standing completely still, and my wife was still on her knees clinging to my waist. All of a sudden, Bigfoot dropped to his knees and sort of fell over to a seating position with his huge legs stretched out. He just sat there with a bit of labored breathing. He had a good-sized bite mark on his shoulder and several scratches all over. The bite he sustained was the one really bleeding. My wife got up, and we both spoke up and said we aren't going to hurt you. Bigfoot turned his head immediately toward us and snorted a little. He kept looking at us. You could see in his eyes that he had no intention of harming us. He was actually quite docile in nature. We actually started to calm down at this point. About 2 to 3 minutes of silence passed, and my wife said that he is still bleeding a lot from the bite wound. So we got the first aid kit out and bundled up the gauze and put ointment on it, and my wife slowly approached him. She got about 5 feet from him, and he growled a little. My wife said again that we weren't going to hurt him, and he saved our lives. We wanted to return the saving act to the best of our abilities. She said it 2 more times before he stopped growling, and then looked at the gauze and his wound. He turned his head away, almost as if he knew it would hurt. She gently outstretched her arm and put the gauze on his wound. He shook a little and snorted some the moment it touched, but then he quickly calmed down and closed his eyes. She held it there for about a minute before pulling it back off. It allowed the bite to stop bleeding. He looked at his wound, and then at her, and then at me. His facial expression softened even more. I approached as well now, and we both tapped our chest, and I said, "My name is Mitch." My wife said, "My name is Ruby." We did that a couple of times, and drew out our names in the dirt. It seemed obvious this creature could not understand us. That is, until he tapped his chest and took his massive finger and drew in the dirt the name Cyrus. We were stunned. He was intelligent enough to understand and communicate back to us. Right as this happened, a sudden roar and tree knocking came from the forest. Cyrus the Bigfoot perked up and looked at us. He quickly rose to his feet and jogged away into the night. We had no idea what just happened or why he ran away. Needless to say, we got no sleep the rest of the night. At first night, we gathered what we had and started hiking the direction we originally were headed. After about an hour, we came to a gravel logging road and started following it down. As we walked, a truck came up from behind, and it was a park ranger. He asked if we were okay, and we told him we got lost and spent the night out in the forest. He quickly got us in his truck and back to the ranger station, where an EMT checked us out and told us we had symptoms of hypothermia from how cold it was, and recommended we go to a hospital for a full checkup. We agreed we would, and the ranger took us there. After a couple of hours, we were released and we got a ride back to our cabin. We still had 2 nights left, so we spent them inside talking about what happened and digesting the events we experienced. We both felt traumatized and just ready to go home. After our time was up, we made it back to Nashville and flew back home. That trip taught us a lesson that we won't soon forget. We didn't count the cost of what it really takes to unplug and to do a week remotely in the woods. We were far too tied to technology and having everything handed to us in our lifestyle. We were disconnected from nature, and it reminded us very quick how unprepared we were. Now we take things a little more serious and we prepare ourselves better for different situations. You just never know when your life can change suddenly. We are both so thankful to our new forest friend and hope we can find him again one day. Without him, I don't know what would have happened the day we were lost in the woods. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. My name is Matt. I hope you enjoyed my story. Your generosity and support is much appreciated, so please hit that subscribe button and like my video and share to your social media. I'll catch everyone in the next video.